If there is one article that you should spend time reading over the weekend, it is this bombshell that was dropped by Whitney Webb. It is called One Label Under Blackmail: The Early Intersections of Diddy and the Epstein Network. Now, this is just part one. And what I will say is this: I read this entire article. We are going to cover certain sections of it tonight. But what Whitney Webb was able to do, she was able to make the connection between Diddy and Epstein. What people have to realize, according to this article, is that Diddy is not the head of the snake, which I told you when he was first arrested. Epstein, not the head of the snake. And what Whitney believes is that these were basically the fall guys to cover for the real corrupt monster, the real head of the snake. You have to read this article if you get a chance. Again, it is One Label Under Blackmail. In part one of this series, you'll see the overlap between the worlds of Sean Diddy Combs and Jeffrey Epstein. We examine Combs' early years, his mentors, the industry figures who ensured their, as well as Combs' own commercial success. Ties to organized crime and intelligence are readily apparent and point toward a truly sinister reason behind this network's patronage of Combs and his close associates like Andre Harrell and Russell Simmons. We're going to go ahead and jump forward to the Clive Davis portion. That's where I am going to start. Whitney does go through Diddy's childhood. She goes into when he moved, uptown. She goes into Uptown Records. She talks about all of that. But I want to start with that intersection of Clive Davis. She refers to MCA as Mob Corporation of America. So that's the record company there, but that's how she refers to it. So again, like I said, when you have time, read the whole article. It is long, I told you. So we're going to jump to the Clive Davis piece. So give me just a second. I just want to make sure I don't pass it. Clive Davis, the hidden power behind Combs' Bad Boy Records. Now we get into this part here. Bad Boy Records' prolonged success was ensured by its early deal with Arista, which later expanded into a joint venture, as well as the man who would become Combs' second record mentor in the music industry, Arista's founder and president, Clive Davis. Clive Davis Arista was originally founded as part of Columbia Pictures' music label portfolio. At the time, Arista entered into its joint venture with Combs, Bad Boy. The label had been sold by Columbia Pictures to BMG, a German media company. However, Davis controlled Arista as if it were his own personal fiefdom until 2000, when he left the label due to BMG's age restriction policy for executives. Bad Boy Records ended what had then become a joint venture with Arista a few years later after Davis's departure. Shortly thereafter, Bad Boy attached itself to Brofman-controlled interests in the music industry, which will be revisited in part 2 of the series. This is the part they go through Clive Davis's upbringing and history. We're going to fast forward to the part right about here when we get to Whitney Houston. I think something you guys need to know is that there was a scandal with Clive Davis. I want to get to this part right about here. It says that there were documents incriminating Winshaw were reportedly found on Falcone at the time of his arrest. It was later reported that with the help of Dave Winshaw, Falcone built CBS Records. The two men set up sham companies in New Jersey. CBS unwittingly paid more than $75,000 to these non-existent operations. Winshaw figured prominently into Davis's downfall, as it was Winshaw who had helped facilitate the money funneled to Falcone and who had written up false invoices that obscured the payments that Davis had used for personal enrichment. It was also believed that Winshaw's role involved in laundering money that was used for off-the-record items like procuring drugs and prostitutes for CBS parties, conferences, and artists, leading him to be colloquially known as Clive's pimp at the label. A Rolling Stone article from the period speculated, based on industry rumors at the time, that Davis' unceremonious firing by CBS over a personal enrichment and embezzlement of funds may have been a strategic attempt to get ahead of a larger Dragola scandal and the possibility that federal investigators might pursue charges against Davis, his trusted aide Winshaw, and others at the company. So here we have, you need to know, before Clive Davis gets involved with Diddy, that Clive Davis was fired apparently over embezzlement when he was at CBS. But he bounced back from this really quickly. Listen to this. Despite the scandal, Davis quickly found his way back into the industry. A little over a year after being fired from CBS Columbia, in the summer of 1974, Davis was hired as a consultant for Bell Records. Goes on to say, according to the 1977 New York Times article, Davis's consulting took the form of letting go most of Bell's performers and executives who had signed them, retaining only a handful as the basis for a renamed company, Arista, with himself in the president's chair. And of course, you know, he goes on to discover Whitney Houston. Clive Davis doesn't go to jail. How'd that happen? How come he don't have to serve any time? Goes on a little bit more here. We're going to jump forward to the part where he gets involved with Diddy. It's under Mentors in Crime. After the scandal around Combs began to break, Clive Davis, as well as Andre Harrell of Uptown and Russell Simmons of Def Jam Rush Management, have been accused of propelling Combs into patterns of criminal behavior, for which he is now infamous. For instance, one-time rival and former friend of Combs, Suge Knight, claimed that Davis, Harrell, and Simmons used alcohol, drugs, specifically cocaine, to compromise Combs' manhood. This is particularly significant in the case of Davis' ties to Dragola scandal, which involve using sex, drugs, and bribes to specifically target Black-oriented radio stations and music. Claims similar to those made by Knight have since been echoed by Combs' former bodyguard, Gene Deal. So if this is true, that Clive Davis and Andre Harrell and Russell Simmons use drugs and alcohol to compromise Diddy's manhood, then you know where Diddy got it from. Let's go on a little bit more here. And there is Diddy with Clive Davis. Again, Clive Davis faces no time, no charges, no nothing. No nothing. It's also worth noting that Davis protege L.A. Reid, who took over Arista Records from Davis, has also been accused of sexual misconduct and assault. Reid, along with Combs, were both instrumental in the success of recording artists Justin Bieber and Usher. Suge Knight, has argued that Davis, Simmons, and Harrell first compromised Combs, and then Combs went on to use alcohol, drugs, and gay sex to control younger artists like Usher and Justin Bieber. This is coming from Suge Knight. So again, Diddy, not the head of the snake. We'll get to the Epstein connection in just a moment. Let's go on. It goes on to say, notably, Combs' entry into the world of Andre Harrell and Simmons and shortly thereafter Clive Davis coincides with the development of his obsessive drive to record everything, presumably for blackmail-related purposes. For instance, music video director Cole Bennett asserted that Combs told him that he'd begun recording footage of everything in 1992 and even advised Bennett to do the same. Got that from who? Clive Davis. I want to go on to this part here. We're getting to Kirk Burroughs, who's the co-founder of Bad Boy with Combs. Burroughs has filed a lawsuit against Combs, claiming Combs subjected him to repeated sexual harassment, physical aggression, and forced compliance with degrading sexual acts throughout the 1990s. He said that Combs targeted him with unwanted sexual advances, including nudity, sexual overtones, voyeurism, and acts of exhibitionism. Some, what they say, took place during business meetings. Let's fast forward here. Combs may have been controlled in a similar way by Davis, per some sources. Okay. They're referring to this. There seemed to be some type of financial extortion and blackmail against Burroughs that Diddy was doing. And what it's saying here is that Suge Knight, for instance, has alleged that he was told by a former head of Interscope Records, Jimmy Levine, that Combs had regularly engaged in sexual acts with Clive Davis, suggesting that his relationship with Davis and Davis early crucial involvement with Bad Boy were built on the back of sexual favors. This is certainly possible given the well-known mechanism within the entertainment industry of sexual favors as a way to secure lucrative roles and deals. They bring up the example of Harvey Weinstein. Davis notably came out as bisexual in his memoir. He was 80 years old, etc. Combs' alleged bisexuality has been a major topic of discussion in relation to the scandal leading up to his arrest last year. Knight has also claimed that Russell Simmons and Andre Harrell had also engaged with similar behavior with each other. Notably, the network behind Clive Davis, which overlaps with that behind Epstein, also involves similar sugar daddy style relationships. I want to bring up the example of Leslie Wexner, the creator of Victoria's Secret. You know, it was rumored for quite some time that Leslie Wexner, who was the guy that gave Jeffrey Epstein his, he wrote that big check for him that kind of started off Jeffrey Epstein's empire, you want to call it. There was rumors back then that there was a sexual relationship between them and that Leslie Wexner was basically a sugar daddy. And he was giving this money to Jeffrey Epstein for Jeffrey to kind of do whatever business ventures he wanted to do with it. And that there was a relationship there. We'll get into it a little bit more. The connection between the two. So just FYI there. Now it gets into the Rat Pack and it brings up, of course, there's Andre, there's Diddy, and then there's Russell Simmons. I don't want to go too deep into that. I kind of want to jump ahead so we can get to the part about the private prisons and hippity hip hop. Making sure I'm on the right part here. I just want to make sure I don't want to skip over anything here. Here we go. For those familiar with One Nation under Blackmail, both Lansky and Rosenbaum also had significant ties to the Israeli intelligence apparatus, especially Rosenbaum, who helped finance key aspects of Israeli intelligence, including via the means that Malnick reportedly helped to develop. So that's important, because what she's saying here is that in the 1960s, a Miami lawyer, Alvin Malnick, set up the Bank of Commerce in the Bahamas. Mob money flowed into its secret number accounts by the hundreds of millions. Mob financier Mayer Lansky money, most of it, and then out again into Tibor Rosenbaum's International Credit Bank of Switzerland before returning to the United States for investment. What you gather a lot from this article, especially as you get towards the end, is that there seemed to be some type of alleged mob ties, not just with Jeffrey Epstein, but also with MCA Records, also with Clive Davis, also with Diddy. This is where you'll start to see that intersection, right? So let's fast forward a little bit here. I promise I'm not going to keep you guys. And then there's Michael Jackson right there. She's going to get into that more in part 2, it says. So I don't want to focus too much on that. Let me jump forward to the part here about the private prisons, because this is important. She's calling out Brett Ratner, sits with Elon Musk and Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That's another person that is called out in this article. Let me go on here. It says that in addition, according to New York Magazine, Ratner was recently seen visiting Mar-a-Lago along with aforementioned James Packer, where they were photographed dining with Trump and Elon Musk earlier this year. A month later, it was reported that Packer bought a Trump-owned property neighboring both Mar-a-Lago's private club and Trump estate there. Let's fast forward here. Notably, Packer had previously bought a property neighboring another state leader, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, back in 2016. In addition, Ratner and the Trump family, as well as Russell Simmons, were among the guests invited to the wedding of Al Malnick's son, Jared Malnick, in early 2024. So this gentleman here in the middle, she highlights as an important person. He was a part of the Combs Russell Simmons clique, and they had a history of cultivating ties to Donald Trump. So that's pretty interesting there. Now we get to the part about the private prisons and the music business. And it was referred to as a conspiracy in plain sight. Now, listen to this part. Jump forward. I want you to hear what happened at this meeting. Quickly after the meeting began, one of my industry colleagues, who shall remain nameless like everyone else, thanked us for attending. He then gave the floor to a man who only introduced himself by his first name and gave no further details about his personal background. Okay, so this is one of those little private meetings. It says here the same year that the Brofman and Tish clans formally joined forces with Leslie Wexner. Again, that's the creator of Victoria's Secret. And others like MCA linked Steven Spielberg via the Mega Group. American record labels had allegedly begun to conspire to promote crime in hip hop lyrics with the ostensible goal of facilitating the filling of private prisons, as those that ran the record labels were allegedly deeply connected to private prison firms. An account from an anonymous industry insider details how in 1991, he was invited to a clandestine meeting where he was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He recounted the events of the meeting as follows. In fact, I have an audio recording of that. Just FYI, the audio is AI. I'm pretty sure that was done so he could protect himself. But listen to what he says. This is also in the article as well, but just listen.
At this point, I begin to feel slightly uncomfortable at the strangeness of this gathering. The subject quickly changed as the speaker went on to tell us that the respective companies we represented had invested in a very profitable industry which could become even more rewarding with our active involvement. He explained that the companies we work for had invested millions into the building of privately owned prisons and that our positions of influence in the music industry would actually impact the profitability of these investments. I remember many of us in the group immediately looking at each other in confusion. At the time, I didn't know what a private prison was, but I wasn't the only one. Sure enough, someone asked what these prisons were and what any of this had to do with us. We were told that these prisons were built by privately owned companies who received funding from the government based on the number of inmates. The more inmates, the more money the government would pay these prisons. It was also made clear to us that since these prisons are privately owned, as they become publicly traded, we'd be able to buy shares.
Let's just pause right there. So, see how all these things are connected. Whitney Webb is showing the connection between these music mobiles, ties to like mob, and mob affiliates, also ties to the private prison system, still all connected to Diddy and also to Epstein. Like, we're not talking about a music label. We're talking about this is a freaking empire. And what they did was they basically sacrificed Diddy and Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but they're not the heads of the snake. They never go after the head. I just read to you that Clive Davis already got in trouble for something else before all this even started, and he didn't even go to jail for embezzlement. How you get off with that? A little bit more here.
Most of us were taken back by this. Again, a couple of people asked what this had to do with us. At this point, my industry colleague who had first opened the meeting took the floor again and answered our questions. He told us that since our employers had become silent investors in this prison business, it was now in their interest to make sure that these prisons remained filled. Our job would be to help make this happen by marketing music which promotes criminal behavior, rap being the music of choice. He assured us that this would be a great situation for us because rap music was becoming an increasingly profitable market for our companies. And
I'll pause it there just because I can only take so much of the AI voice, and then we'll just go back to the article where you can see that written here as well. And she made this text is a lot larger here. So I want you to hear that. So basically what they were saying is that this is insane. Our job would be to help make this happen by marketing music that promotes criminal behavior, rap being the music of choice. He assured us that this would be a great situation for us because rap music was becoming a profitable market. And it said that we'd be able to buy personal stocks in these prisons. Immediately, silence came over the room. You could have heard a pin drop. So here you have these rich, crime-ridden dudes purposefully trying to create more crime to fill these prisons so that they can continue to get rich off of that. This part. In the early 1990s, a former graduate student, then keyboardist for Stevie Wonder, called me upset that some record labels were actively recruiting Black men with criminal records to record rap. He believed that they were encouraging criminal acts among this group. Let's go on a little bit more here. This is important. Then we get to Clinton. Clinton, not unlike Ronald Reagan, was very under the thumb of MCA's Lew Wasserman. Wasserman began backing Clinton's presidential campaign in 1992, but had first met Clinton back when he was governor of Arkansas. Wasserman would later broker the close ties between Clinton and his grandson, Casey Wasserman, who, like Clinton, was an Epstein associate. This led the Wasserman Foundation becoming one of the main donors to the controversial Clinton Foundation. Wasserman, as well as his protege, Steven Spielberg, were major donors to Clinton's 1996 re-election campaign. So much that it earned them overnight stays in the White House Lincoln bedroom. This part right here, I think, is important. Brofman and Wasserman both received Presidential Medal of Freedom during Clinton's presidencies. Notably, companies tied to Brofman and Wasserman, MCA, Universal, played a major role in lobbying for the passage of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which Clinton signed into law and which allowed extreme industry consolidation and the formation of de facto monopolies in entertainment and beyond. There is Wasserman there in the chair. So guys, this goes far beyond a music label. Like, these guys were involved in the political space. They were lobbying legislation. That's how much power these guys had. Like, this is straight up gangster. I mean, we saw the movie The Godfather, but damn. And then this part. Let's jump down here. MCA's close ties, MCA records to the CIA. There was evidence of this beyond those indicated by the Promise scandal were noted by Lew Wasserman biographer Dennis McDougal. McDougal received a response from the CIA in response to an FOIA request. The 17 separate computer searches revealed MCA did work with the CIA. The CIA refused to release any of its MCA documents on grounds that it might endanger national security. It goes on to say Melanie Carlson, who was writing for the Covert Action magazine, also thoroughly detailed MCA's ties to the mob, the CIA, the Promise scandal, and the death of journalist Danny Casolaro in a 2024 investigation. So what Whitney is saying in this article is that MCA, the record label, wasn't just a record label. It was basically like a front group. That MCA was tied to the mob and to the CIA. Just like she mentioned about Death Row, how Death Row was kind of like a front group. So you see how this is all like connected. So let me jump towards the end, because like I said, I know it's very long. They get into the drugs in the community. This part is really important here. Let me just highlight this. Gary Webb, he was the one that kind of blew the whistle on the CIA, right, putting drugs into the Black communities. After his Dark Alliance series concluded, the outlet that had run it published an editorial noting that Webb's work can only feed longstanding rumors in Black communities that the U.S. government created the crack cocaine epidemic to kill and imprison African Americans and otherwise wreak the havoc in inner cities. So Gary Webb mysteriously died after this. But what I will say is you basically have this record label, MCA, which is basically a front group, is tied to the mob and the CIA. The CIA is pushing out crack into the low income, like urban Black communities. At the same time, you have these record executives, these, big time people that you would probably never meet in your life that were connected to MCA, that were trying to use gangster rap to create and escalate the violence to help fill the private prisons. It's all connected. You can't fill the prisons if you don't have crime. So if I would assume in cases where there was no crime, maybe that's where the crack comes in. Because if there's not enough crime happening and these prisons are not filling, then that's where the CIA comes in to bring the drugs into the community or plant drugs on people if they needed to get those crime rates up. One label under Blackmail. Last piece here. Let's jump forward here to the end. But definitely check this out when you guys get time. Like I said, I know it's long, but it's definitely worth the read, right? And there's more and more statements in here that she says is from Suge Knight. So first and foremost, for part 2 of this series, we will examine the East versus West rap feud and the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, as well as their relevance to the Sean Combs story in greater detail. This part is important as well, because it says here that Death Row was an intelligence front, not only an intelligence front, but it was also teaming with dirty cops and corrupt informants who had been assigned to moonlight as security guards at the label for drugs/weapons dealing, informing, and COINTELPRO purposes. So they're going to get into more of that in part 2, but I'm just trying to get to the end part here because there's one part that I do want to read for you. Here we go. Given the above, all the elements of a perfect storm to perpetuate mass incarceration of African Americans were put into place along the same timeline and by many of the same actors deeply tied to the CIA and organized crime. When we add the alleged efforts to stoke violence in hip hop, as exemplified by Combs and his Bad Boy Records, after he had become enmeshed in this very network, as well as his West Coast rivals, we have yet another component that suggests this network used its influence over hip hop industry to socially engineer criminal behavior while also ensuring that cheap, addictive drugs and cheap guns simultaneously flooded urban African American communities. MCA and CIA connected Wacken Hut would have reaped mass profits from this apparent operation as the number of prisoners in its private prisons swelled. However, other major multinational corporations who utilize inmate labor from these prisons profited as well. A litany of American companies like Walmart and Microsoft are among those who have long history of profiting handsomely from inmate labor. Several of these corporations include companies run by the mega group billionaires like Lester Crown's General Dynamics, a major military contractor, and Leslie Wexner's Victoria's Secret, though the lingerie firm claimed to have ended the contract after it became public knowledge in the 1990s. So it's also Walmart and it's also Microsoft. So you guys need to know that as well, that benefited from private prisons. And then the very last part here kind of wraps it up. Combs from the 90s appears to have been a key frontman for his network and his ambitions. He was likely not the sole mastermind or beneficiary of all the scandalous parties, sexual violence, and public promotion of violence and alleged blackmail in which he engaged. He was a product of a network and a system that, in the case of Combs, was seeking to target and corrupt the broader African American community in similar ways. Ultimately, Combs, like some other prominent entertainers, was servile to his music industry masters. He worked within a system those masters controlled and attempted to expand his own influence and power within that system. But at the end of the day, he was never in charge. But at the end of the day, he was never in charge. In the next installment of this series, we will explore Combs' expanding influence in hip hop and also in other industries like retail, again, all courtesy of the very same network outlined in this piece. While Combs publicly projected power and success, both of those things were conditional. And like Epstein, now exposed, he is due to take the fall in order to take the heat off of the people behind the curtain. One label under Blackmail. That is by Whitney Webb. Get yourself some popcorn or something this weekend, get comfy, and you can read the entire article. It's very detailed. It's really good. She did phenomenal work here, but you'll see how some of the same people that were connected to MCA were also connected to Epstein. What a tangled web we weave. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.